Okay, I'm going to try and give you a short summary of what I've found out about the laws relating to carrying knives in public throughout the states and territories of Australia. Just a couple of things I've got to say at the outset. You need to appreciate that each state and territory within Australia makes their own laws on this subject that apply to what goes on in their particular state and territory. Now, there's some similarities amongst the states and territories. There's also some differences. And I'm going to be focused on what is allowed or what is not allowed, which seems to be more the issue here, in public, rather than what you do in the privacy of your own home. A couple of disclaimers here. You cannot view this as legal advice. It's just a brief summary of information I've got from some basic Google searches. And if you need legal advice specific to your particular situation and your state, then you're just going to have to find a good lawyer that practices in this area and pay them to give you the legal advice that you're entitled to rely on. And finally, this is the situation as of April of 2024. Bear in mind that the laws are always changing, and particularly we've just had two very prominent public stabbings in Australia, so I predict there's a strong chance that the knife laws are going to be made even tougher. So let's just have a look at the position in respect of each of the states and territories, starting with New South Wales. So in New South Wales, it's a criminal offence to have possession of a knife in a public place or school if you do not have a reasonable excuse for having possession of that knife. And you'll see there the maximum penalty is 2 years imprisonment or a fine of $2,200. So what's going to happen in New South Wales if you're at a school or a public place and you're found to be in possession of a knife? Well, on the face of it, you've committed a criminal offence, unless either the police that you're having the interaction with, or the courts, if the court charges you and you plead not guilty, are persuaded that you've got a reasonable excuse for having possession of that knife. What are the possible defences or the possible reasonable excuses? Well, we don't know. There's no specific or precise list. If you tick these things, then you have a reasonable excuse. There's always going to be some flexibility in how the police or the magistrate interprets these things. But a reasonable excuse for having possession of a knife could be that it is your lawful occupation. You need the knife for your lawful occupation. You're using the knife for the preparation or consumption of food. You're using the knife to participate in lawful entertainment, recreation, or sports. The knife is being used for retail or other trade purposes. There's an exhibition being organised by knife collectors. The knife is in your possession as a result of wearing an official uniform, or you have possession of the knife for religious purposes. So it's not a defence to the charge if you say your excuse for having possession of the knife was for the sole purpose of self-defence or for the defence of another person. So as I read that, if you're in New South Wales, if you're caught in a school or in public with a knife, and if you say your reason for having the knife is for self-defence, either for yourself or another person, that's not a reasonable excuse. You've committed this criminal offence. So we move on now to Victoria. You cannot carry knives, including kitchen knives, Swiss Army knives, box cutters, batons, cattle prods, or bayonets without a lawful excuse. A lawful excuse could, you'll see that word could because there's no certainty about these things. These things are going to be judged on a case-by-case basis. But a lawful excuse could include having the weapon for work, sport, recreation, or a weapons collection, display, or exhibition. Lawful excuse does not include self-defence. So there's many similarities there to the situation in New South Wales. And also you can only possess or carry some weapons if you do so safely. So if you're brandishing a weapon or in any way acting in a way that could be perceived as threatening or intimidatory, you're probably still committing the criminal offence. You cannot carry weapons like flick knives, daggers. As I understand it, and I might be wrong about this, a dagger has got sharpened sides on both sides of the blade. Butterfly knives, knuckle knives, swords, nunchuckers, knuckle dusters, shanghais, blowguns, imitation firearms, capsicum spray, slingshot, weighted or studded gloves, throwing stars or catapults, without a special exemption or permission from police. So on the basis, all of those items are illegal to be carried unless you're able to obtain a special exemption or permission. You'll also see that Victorian police have been granted certain search powers. In Victoria, police can search you, your bag or your car for weapons without a warrant if they reasonably suspect you are carrying a weapon illegally. So if a police officer forms a reasonable belief that you may be carrying a weapon illegally, they have these rights of search without the need for obtaining a search warrant. And just being in an area where there is a lot of violent crime can be reason enough for police to search you without a warrant. Police can also search you if you are in a place that police have declared to be a special designated area for weapons searches. Police usually tell people that the public area has become a designated area by publishing it in the local newspaper. So if you're in such a designated area, police do not need any reason to suspect you're carrying weapons. They can just search you. But they must show you a search notice before they search you. If police have the power to search you without a warrant and you resist, you can be charged with a criminal offence such as obstructing police or something of that nature. Queensland. Now, Queensland seems to have looser or liberal knife laws compared to New South Wales and Victoria. In Queensland, it is a reasonable excuse to physically possess a knife, to perform a lawful activity, duty or employment, to participate in lawful entertainment, recreation or sports, for exhibiting the knife, for use or for a lawful purpose. And there's some quoted examples from their legislation. You may carry a knife on your person or on your belt for performing work in primary production. A scout may carry a knife on their belt as part of a scout uniform. A person may carry a knife as an accessory while playing in a pipe band. A fisher may carry a knife for use while fishing. A person who collects knives may exhibit them at a fete or another public gathering. A person may use a knife to prepare or cut food at a restaurant or in a public place, such as when having a picnic in a park. Or a person may carry a penknife or a Swiss Army knife for use for its normal utility purpose. So that seems to be an exemption there. Queensland specifically referred to penknives or Swiss Army knives, whereas New South Wales or Victoria, they don't seem to make any specific mention of that. So on the face of it, if you're carrying a penknife or a Swiss Army knife in Victoria or New South Wales, you may be viewed as committing a criminal offence. It's a reasonable excuse to possess a knife in a public place in Queensland for genuine religious purposes, such as the Sikh religion. It's not a reasonable excuse to possess a knife for religious purposes in a school. So there's a prohibition there for carrying knives in a school. South Australia, well, there's a pretty much blanket ban there. A person who, without lawful excuse, carries an offensive weapon is guilty of an offence. And the South Australian definition of an offensive weapon, you'll see it includes a rifle, gun, pistol, knife. So just the word knife. So on the face of that, it's a criminal offence to carry a knife without a lawful excuse. Western Australia, and I want to come back to Western Australia because I might need to do a little bit more work on that. From what I can work out, Western Australia categorise certain weapons as being prohibited weapons or controlled weapons. There's laws in respect of being in possession or carrying prohibited weapons or controlled weapons. These seem to include things such as butterfly knives, disguised knives, flick knives, switchblades, knuckle knives, daggers, double-ended knives, machetes, sickles or scythes, and throwing knives. So you're going to have problem if you're carrying or in possession of any of those particular styles of knives. But from what I can see, it seems to be okay if you're carrying a knife that does not fall into any of the categories of being a prohibited or controlled weapon. However, you've got this proviso, Section 8 of the legislation. A person who carries or possesses an article not being a firearm, so that includes a knife, not being a prohibited weapon or controlled weapon. So it's a knife that's not a prohibited weapon or a controlled weapon, a standard knife. You've got a problem there if it's viewed that you are carrying or possessing a standard knife with the intention of using it, whether or not for defence, to injure or disable any person, or to cause any person to fear that someone will be injured or disabled by that use. So if you're stopped in Western Australia by police and you've got any sort of knife, if you tell police it's for the intention of using it for self-defence, or if the police get the perception that you've got that knife with an intention to injure or disable any person, or to cause any form of fear, then you have committed a criminal offence. And also you'll see here in Western Australia, I've pulled this up, but it looks like Western Australia wants to get more proactive and is seriously contemplating the introduction of stop and search laws, allowing police the powers to stop and search pretty much anybody to see if they are in possession of a knife. We'll go to Tasmania here, and position in Tasmania, amendment to the Police Offences Act has come into view. It allows police to proactively remove knives from people in public places who do not have a lawful reason to have them. People undertaking lawful activities that require use of a knife will not be affected by these changes. For example, a tradesman who uses a knife in their work will be able to carry it on their way to and from work and while they are working, and some recreational activities will be exempt. Example, people going fishing, camping or hunting can possess a knife for those purposes. However, people who regularly carry a knife, including a pocket knife or multi-tool, can no longer do so in a public place unless they're pursuing a specific lawful activity for which the knife is required. So what could be lawful excuses in Tasmania? Knife in my car. The legislation in relation to knives and other weapons includes knives inside of motor vehicles if the motor vehicle is in a public place. However, the lawful excuse provisions that exempt from the offence cover legitimate reasons for having a knife in a vehicle. So those issues that would allow you to have a reasonable excuse for having a knife in public in Tasmania, they would apply to knives in your vehicles when your vehicle is in a public place. A knife or multi-tool that forms part of the vehicle's toolkit and is with other tools in the boot is permitted. However, a hunting knife inside the map pocket of a driver's door would not be. Similarly, in circumstances where a person was travelling to or from a lawful activity where they required a knife, possession of knife in a vehicle would be lawful. This would include securing the knife in the vehicle if stopping on the way to or from the activity for some other reason. So stopping off at the shops or running other sort of errands. Tradesmen would be permitted to secure a knife in their vehicles with their other tools when they'd finished for the day. In fact, this is preferred to them carrying the knife on them, especially if stopping at places like a pub or hotel on their way home. What are the categories of a lawful excuse under the Tasmanian legislation? The legislation lists a number of lawful excuses for the carriage of a knife. The list's not exhaustive, but it includes pursuit of a lawful occupation, duty or activity, participation in a lawful sport, recreation or entertainment, using the dangerous article, lawful collection, display or exhibition of that dangerous article, using the dangerous article for the lawful purpose for which it was intended. That's unusual, and I might want to do some more work about what that involves, what that means, and also for religious observance. Similar to many other states, self-defence is not a lawful excuse that justifies the possession or carriage of a knife in a public place. So moving to the ACT, I've pulled up here their legislation. A person shall not, without reasonable excuse, have a knife in his or her possession in a public place or school. Without limiting what might constitute as a reasonable excuse, the legislation says it is a reasonable excuse to have a knife in your possession in a public place or a school if it is necessary for or for a purpose incidental to the lawful pursuit of your occupation, the preparation or consumption of food, participation in a lawful entertainment, recreation or sports, to exhibit knives for retail or trade purposes, an organised exhibition by knife collectors, the wearing of an official uniform, or religious purposes. And similar to many of the other Australian jurisdictions, it is not a reasonable excuse for a person to have a knife in your possession in a public place or school solely for the purpose of self-defence or the defence of another person. And finally, we get to the Northern Territory. So in the Northern Territory, there are certain weapons that their parliament has declared as prohibited weapons. They include flick knives, slingshots, butterfly knives, capsicum spray, knuckle dusters, studded gloves, imitation guns. And it is an offence to make, buy, sell or bring prohibited weapons into the Northern Territory. It's also an offence to possess, use or carry such weapons in the Northern Territory. That obviously includes things in your home. Maximum penalty, 2 years imprisonment. There are controlled weapons in the Northern Territory. These include knives, laser pointers, certain types of slingshots, spear guns, nightsticks, crossbows and cattle prods. It is an offence for a person to possess, carry or use a controlled weapon in a public place or school unless you have a lawful reason to do so. So on the face of that, that seems to cover any knife. Lawful reasons for possessing, carrying or using controlled weapons can include employment, hunting, collection and display of weapons, but will usually depend on the circumstances of the case. Every person who has a lawful reason to possess, carry or use a controlled weapon still need to carry the weapon in a safe and secure manner. Failing to do so can mean that you have committed a criminal offence. They have a category of offensive weapons. It's an offence to possess, carry or use an offensive weapon in a public place or school unless you have a lawful reason to do so. Anything can be an offensive weapon as long as it is either modified or made to cause injury of fear in a person. So made or modified to cause injury of fear of injury. I think that should be to either cause injury or fear of injury in a person, or to cause damage to property. Or used by a person who intends to cause injury or fear of injury in such a person, or to cause damage to property. So there's some similarity there to the West Australian position as well in the Northern Territory. So there you go, that sort of wraps up what I can work out about the various knife laws in place among the different states and territories in Western Australia. So we range from strict prohibition unless the knife is carried with a lawful excuse, to some situations where you're going to have problems if police get the opinion that you're carrying it with an intention to use it for something nefarious, or to brandish it, or to scare, or to frighten people. All right, look, this is an interesting subject. I feel I've only scratched the surface of it. If you think I'm wrong, I would love to be corrected, so please post your comments where you think I might have the position wrong. And this might be something that I'm going to have to review or update in the future. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Take it easy.